Hello, this is Robert Kiyosaki, and this is my sweetheart, Kim.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about how we got out of debt. Our story actually begins around 1984 when we first got together as a couple. And I was personally deeply in debt. I had lost nearly $1 million in one of my many businesses. And I still owed another $400,000. $500,000 was paid off. So when I met Kim, I was like this big albatross around her financial neck because I had no money. On top of that, I was in debt.
And on top of that, though, you did live in one of the nicest apartments in Waikiki. You drove a nice little Mercedes, so you were certainly looking good. I had no idea you had no money.
Yeah, I did look good and rich. Now, I'm going to explain that real quickly. That apartment on Waikiki Beach, right on the shores of Diamond Head, the same place where Tom Selleck used to live, only cost me $300 a month. And the Mercedes was an old beat-up Mercedes, but it looked good. But I was still deeply in debt and madly in love with Kim, and we decided to make our lives together. So that was in 1984 we got together, and it's how we paid off quite a bit of debt, even though we had no jobs and no money. But the good news is, even though we went through this process, this 10-step process, Kim and I were financially free by 1994. So we were not only completely out of debt, but we had invested enough so that we never had to work again for the rest of our lives. So this is a true story of how we got out of debt.
And after we met in 1984, we then decided we were going to go build a new business together, and we left Hawaii with everything we had and headed to California, and within about 3 months, we were pretty much broke. And
yeah, Kim's savings didn't last that long.
What, $900? Come on. But we went through that money pretty quickly, and as I said, we were broke. We were actually homeless for a short period of time. We slept in a car. We knocked on friends' doors if we could stay with them. And I'll tell you, when it comes to struggling financially, we know what it's like. The pressure, the stress, the arguments. It was a really tough time.
So I would say 1984 through 1986, 87 were probably the toughest years in our lives because not only were we building this business, we had to survive, but also pay off a large amount of debt. We have no money coming in with no steady job. And fortunately, a friend let us live in her apartment, which is in her basement, in her garage. And somehow something always happened that we survived. And we ran out of money several times along the way, but somehow we survived.
And I still remember back then, the credit cards that we had, they didn't have not all the merchants had the electronic machines. A lot of them they made an imprint. So we would find the places like the motels and all where they would just take an imprint so they couldn't check and see that our credit cards were maxed out. So on top of the debt Robert had, because we were then broke, we did not have any income coming in at the time because we were building our business, we were also accumulating more and more debt. So the problem wasn't getting any better.
Right. The interest on the debt was just kept accruing. And I still remember in 1984 driving around in a friend's borrowed car, and Kim and I, she said, we were looking for any place to sleep that would take our credit card. And we're up and down just north of San Diego and going in and out of little motels, and they would say, your credit card's no good and we have to go someplace else. And it was horrible. I mean, talk about self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth. It was absolutely horrible. So that's when the yo-yos told me, well, money's not that important to me. Obviously, they haven't been broke yet. And it was a horrible time. And as Kim says, we fought a lot during that period of time. I don't know why she stuck it out with me. But I also know that she didn't marry me for my money because
he had no money. But we were having a good adventure together. And it's true that the hit to your self-esteem and your self-worth, your self-confidence, you start to doubt everything. And so it was important that we were going through this together because at least we could lean on each other when one of us got scared or frightened. We had someone to talk to and really go through this together.
So I'd like to say $400,000 today isn't a lot of money, but back then, that was almost 20-something years ago, it was a considerable sum. And on several occasions, people advised me personally to just take bankruptcy and not pay the $400,000. Now, there's several reasons I didn't do that, and bankruptcy or foreclosure, i.e. losing your house, are pretty serious, and we never had to go through any of that simply because I had already sold all my rental property and my investment property, and I was still broke. So I didn't have to go through foreclosure, but I still had this debt. So at the end of this recording, a great friend of Kim and ours, Scott McPherson, who is a mortgage banker, will be talking to those of you who may be facing foreclosure or bankruptcy or already have gone through foreclosure or bankruptcy. And as a banker, he will give you his points of view, what you can do. But I'm kind of happy to say I did not have to take personal bankruptcy. We decided instead to just pay off the debt, which are the 10 steps we're going to come to.
And much of the debt was your personal family and friends as well.
Yeah, my investors in my business, and I felt obligated to pay them back. So I didn't want to, stiff them through a bankruptcy. So we paid it off. There's one more reason. If I owed $1 million and I was only making, let's say, $75,000 a year, and that was the most I could earn, I'd probably declare bankruptcy. But because Kim and I were entrepreneurs, we had the ability through our businesses to generate pretty substantial amounts of cash to pay off the debt pretty quickly. So that is a key reason I did not declare bankruptcy. And otherwise, bankruptcy is always an option. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I strongly recommend if you're facing it right now, please get good legal advisors, credit counseling services and all that, and face the problem now. But we did not declare bankruptcy or foreclosure.
So the name of this program is How We Got Out of Debt. And as we've talked about often, there's two kinds of debt. There's good debt and bad debt. So Robert, you want to explain that a little bit?
We had tremendous amounts of bad debt. And bad debt is debt that doesn't make you rich. For example, if I buy a house and I have to pay for it, I buy a car and I have to pay for it, that's bad debt.
Or women who want to buy all that nice jewelry, that's bad debt.
And nice shoes, that's bad debt. And good debt is debt that somebody else pays for you. But the reason getting rid of bad debt was so important for us in our starting our lives together was that it's easier to get good debt, i.e. loans and things like that on apartment houses and commercial buildings and rental property if you have no bad debt. And so we had no blemishes by the time we came through this process. We never stopped investing, by the way, but we did pay off the bad debt and get into good debt. So good debt is very simply debt that makes you rich and somebody else pays off for you, i.e. your tenants. And bad debt is debt that makes you poorer every month and you have to pay for. One more thing I'd like to add about financial intelligence. There's many people who just simply say, get out of debt. And that's a good idea if it's bad debt. But if you're going to be a savvy investor or have a high financial IQ, it is important to realize there is good debt. And that's what I just explained. Another thing that's very important about good debt is one of the ways Kim and I were able to retire in less than 10 years was once we got out of the bad debt, or as we got out of the bad debt, we were investing with good debt. And what I say to most people who have mutual funds or stocks or bonds and savings, I said, the trouble with that stuff is your banker doesn't lend you money, i.e. savings are your dollars. I'd rather invest with my debt banker's dollars. So high financial intelligence is knowing how to use good debt to get richer quicker. But then that brings up the next subject. You got to know a good investment from a bad investment. And the thing I always say to all you mutual fund lovers out there is ask your bank if your banker will lend you $1 million to buy mutual funds. The answer is no, simply because mutual funds are too risky. So that's part of the financial intelligence. And the way we got out of debt and we got financially free so quickly was we knew the difference between good debt and bad debt. So what this CD is about is getting out of bad debt. So we'll start with the 10 steps of getting out of debt. And for those of you who have the workbook, please follow along with the workbook that comes with this CD series. So step number 1 is you got to tell yourself the truth. And I think that's one of the hardest things I had to do because, Kim had never met a financial disaster like me before. She couldn't believe anybody could be driving a Mercedes and living in a nice hotel right on the shores of Diamond Head and be flat broke, but also deeply in debt. And I kept pretending I was rich, and that was, I was faking it till I make it. And, I was praying to God and Jesus and Buddha and hoping that money would come by and pretending I had no debt, and I was looking good and, eating in the best restaurants and flaunting the cash. But I was flat broke. You can fake your girlfriends, but you can't fake your wife. And so the first thing I had to do with Kim was sit down and eventually tell her the truth that I wasn't as rich as I looked.
Well, it's true. You've got to tell yourself the truth, because if you have a goal of where you want to go, you're not going to be able to get there if you don't know where you are. Yeah. So basically, it's telling yourself the truth, not lying to yourself, not pretending anymore. Here's the hard facts. Here's where I am.
Yeah, but I still thought it was a good deal. This condo right on Diamond Head Beach and the best, it was a Colony Surf hotel, and I had room service and all this great stuff. It still was only $300 a month. It was cheaper than any place else I could find at the time.
It was a good deal. You were still broken in debt.
Yeah, I could negotiate very well, and my Mercedes was a nice-looking 450 SL Mercedes, but it was kind of a little old and burned some oil.
So once you have sat down and faced that you're going to tell yourself the truth, the step number two is you've got to stop accumulating the bad debt.
Yes, and what that meant is sometimes you might have to make a little bit of sacrifice. And when Kim and I moved from Hawaii to California and then went homeless right away, and we were living in the garage basement apartment, there was sometimes I had to run up. We had no money, and so Kim had like $2 to get through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday till I came home Sunday night and hopefully got paid for what I was doing. So I want you to tell them how you survived on $2.
Well, first of all, gas costs. So I didn't want to use up a lot of gas and drive to a lot of places. And there was this little taco stand that I could walk to. It was about 3 blocks from where we lived. And so I'd walk down this little taco stand, get my little cheese and chicken quesadilla, and it cost me $1. And then I'd walk back and I'd have my quesadilla. And the next day I'd walk down and have a second quesadilla, and that's $2. And that's basically how we would survive at times.
Right. And Kim is, she has a great figure and all that, but she does like to eat. But she was able to make 4 meals out of 2 for $2, and she survived. And I'd come home, Sunday night from a trip or either Monday morning, and then we had some money again. But then we went through the process of first getting out of bad debt rather than going out to a restaurant and sucking down some $100 bottle of wine and eating some prime rib and stuff. So we lived pretty frugally during this period of time till we got our feet on the ground and built a new business.
So really what we did is we put a freeze on all of accumulating more debt on our credit card because for one reason, we couldn't use our credit cards because they were so maxed out. So again, we did have to make some sacrifice, but that alone started putting us into control of handling our money.
Yeah, I wore shirts a little longer. I didn't, go out and buy a new shirt, a new socks, a new underwear. I kind of used them a little longer, washed them a little better, and kept going, but we didn't just keep spending money, which a lot of people do, because, a lot of times people eat or spend or they shop when they feel depressed. And I think that's really an easy thing to get into or drink a lot. I mean, I was tempted to hit the bottle a number of times. I felt so bad, but that cost money. So we just basically got back on our feet. It took us about 6 months. And then the money, once the business was up and running, cash started to come in on a little bit more regular basis. But during that period of time, we really made it a point not to just waste our money on things that got us deeper in debt.
Which brings us to the next step. Step number 3 is make a list of all, and the key word is all, the debt that you owe.
And she's still giving me a dirty look when she says the word all because, I had so much debt I didn't want to tell her. And I kept sneaking off and paying bills here and sneaking around there. And finally she says, because I didn't want to tell her how bad the Titanic was that I ran aground and called my last business. And finally we had to sit down and I had to write down all the investors I owed money to, all the friends and family I owed money to, and everybody I felt bad about, that I was still not paying and things like this. So she had me sit down and write. And even, the credit card companies, they get really nasty when you don't pay them. So I had to show her the envelopes I was receiving from the angry credit card companies and all this stuff, and basically tell the truth and face the music.
I still remember every once in a while, Robert would put his list together, and then the next day he'd come back and he goes, well, I didn't think this one was so important, but there is this guy in Hawaii, and I really still do owe him $4,000. I could probably not pay him, and he'd be okay. I'm like, let's put down the $4,000. Let's put it on the list. Let's keep going.
Yeah,
so that alone was a little painful process.
And his name was Richie, and unfortunately, he was a friend of both of us, so I had to tell him the truth. So we paid Richie his $4,000, even though he was fine with not getting it back because he had invested in a company and the company did go down. But I just felt personally obligated to him because I did borrow the $10,000 from him and I still owed him $4,000. So we paid him back the $4,000 eventually. So step number 4 is a very important step. And all you guys out there who are deeply in debt and all this, I'd like to say this is probably the most important first real step you can go through, or a major commitment. And that is hire a bookkeeper. If you look in the workbook, I talk about a bookkeeper as part of your team. And there was times, I was just trying to do my own books. And, when I'm stressed out and embarrassed and upset that I owe so much money, I would not really confront the truth. Plus I'm messy. I'm not very detail oriented. So Kim and I finally went out, and my rich dad talked to me, and we're talking over with him. He says, "Do you have a bookkeeper?" And I said, "No, because it costs too much money." And he says, "Look, rich people have bookkeepers. Poor people don't. You have got to keep accurate records. And you're not supposed to do that because your job is to make money, not to keep track of the money necessarily. Her job is to give you accurate records that you can look at, and a bookkeeper is the most important part of your team. So I say this right now because when I was facing so much debt, it was really hard to go and spend the $200 to $400 a month on a bookkeeper. But it was one of the most important steps. And like you go, for those who read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, in there, my rich dad always say, never say I can't afford it, because poor people say I can't afford it. So a bookkeeper was somebody that was very important, an important expense and key to us getting out of debt, because every month old Betty would force, especially me and Kim, to sit down and look at our financial situations, and we had to come up with a plan of how we were going to get out of debt.
See, spending the money was the hardest thing for you. Facing those bills twice a month and seeing very little money coming in and a lot of money going out, that took everything to sit down there and not want to bolt out of there.
Yeah, and Betty was this little sweet little lady who was vicious if you didn't pay your bills.
Talk about holding you accountable. Talk about making sure all your debts are there, making sure you're telling yourself the truth. That was Betty.
Betty reminded me of my first grade teacher, and I was having, just nervous reaction every time I was around her. But she really held our feet to the fire, my feet to the fire especially, and we had to face all the bills and who was being paid what. And to this day, now we have multiple bookkeepers because the cash is pouring in. But I'll say it to all of those of you who may be in financial trouble, hire a bookkeeper, simply because rich people have bookkeepers. You don't have to pay them that much to start, but as your wealth grows, you'll really appreciate it if you have good records. Not only that, your banker will be more willing to give you good debt if you have accurate records and neat and tidy and timely and prepared every month.
Now, one other story about Betty is that Robert and I also knew that we had to pay off our bad debt, but we also had to start accumulating money for our future. And so we had this philosophy. It was called Pay Yourself First. I'm sure it's familiar to many of you. And our plan was we had 3 piggy banks. And for those of you who have read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know about the 3 piggy banks.
But let me say something about Betty first. She wanted to pay bills first. Now, she was a good bookkeeper, but she wasn't a rich bookkeeper. Now, if you want to be rich, you got to pay yourself first. So I would go in there and I'd say, okay, Betty, we're going to pay ourselves first. And then she'd turn into this old school teacher and start scolding me. So we'd argue back and forth. That's why she was a good member of the team. But we always paid ourselves first. And if you read the book, it's pay yourself 10%, 10%, 10%, or 30%, one for savings, one for investing, and one for tithing. So that means if you make $1,000, you're paying $300 right off the top. And most people scream and quit and cry and give up at that point. So the reason what Kim's mentioning the piggy banks is at the start, it may be too painful to pay 30% of what your gross is. So start with a piggy bank. I don't care if it's 10 cents a day or 1 penny a day, but get the habit of putting money aside for savings, investing, and tithing. And if you do it every day, it becomes a habit. And for those who have read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, what I say, it's not money that makes you rich, it's your habits that make you rich. So even when you're broke, even when we were broke, we still paid ourselves first. And the reason Betty is probably still broke is she never paid herself first. She paid her bills first.
So our rule was with every dollar bill that came into our household, we took 30% off the top. And as Robert said, it doesn't have to be 30%, but that was our discipline. But here's what Betty would say. When we proposed this to Betty, she goes, because we had all these bills that were due and all these creditors that were screaming at us to pay. She said, oh, no. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pay all the bills first. And then what's left over, we'll put into your piggy banks.
And that's why she's still poor.
Because there was never, ever going to be anything left over because we owed so much money.
Please hear this. I mean, this is probably the next most important thing after hiring a person like Betty, is you've really got to pay yourself first. Please hear me. Poor and middle-class people pay themselves last. So the hard part was we would take off, and I said, it doesn't have to be 30%. Let's say even if it's $10, $10 per month, at least you get in the habit of doing that. And then you pay your bills, and you'd be surprised how smart you become if you have to pay those bills, because look, your piggy banks don't scream at you, but the people who want their money do. So if once you pay yourselves first, the people that scream at you kind of give you the motivation to go out and find some more money.
And I was amazed at how fast that money would accumulate, because you put it aside, you're not allowed to touch it. It's for investing, for charity, and for savings. And so we did not touch it, but boy, did it accumulate quickly. And that's actually part of the how we got financed on our very first property.
Right. And if you look and you listen to most people who are really rich, like some of the really rich guys, they say save 50%. I forget John Templeton he says you put 50% aside. Now, 30% was hard enough. But he says if you keep increasing it, pretty soon that 50% grows to 60% to 70%. So today, even though Kim and I make millions and millions and millions of dollars, we're now reinvesting over 80%. So the 30% kept growing simply because we established good habits during this process of getting out of debt, of bad debt, and getting into good debt. So one of the reasons we're getting richer faster today is that we're now investing millions and millions of dollars, but we're still living we're not frugal by any means. We have a nice house, nice cars, and all this stuff. But we got into the habit of paying ourselves first. So 30% can grow today for us 80%. And I think that is one of the biggest secrets about paying yourself first. And as I said, Betty, bless her soul, paid her bills first. And I used my bill collectors and people who hated me as motivation to go make more money, but I still paid myself first.
And by the end of this program, and if you read the workbook, you're going to find out the formula for how to pay off all your debt. Plus, the other objection we get is I don't have any money to invest. So you're going to learn, number one, how to pay off all your debt. And number two, you're going to have money to invest if you follow this formula.
So that's the setup, and just know it's mostly discipline and determination. And please hear us. So that was 1984 to 1994, and Kim and I were financially free in 10 years. We never had to work again for the rest of our lives and still got out of all this debt. So that's why this formula works. So let's go through steps 5 through 10, and we'll now go into the step-by-step. And this is where Kim is very good at this process because she primarily set the whole thing up to do it. And again, go to your workbook so you'll see these diagrams, and it's hard to follow if you don't have the diagram. So please take it over, Kim.
Okay, well, this is step number 5. And now that you've got a list of every debt that you owe, you're going to make a visual picture of that debt. And very simply, what you're going to do is you're going to draw a quadrant for each debt. And in the upper left-hand column of the quadrant, you're going to put the creditor. So, for example, it might be Visa. In the upper right-hand column goes the total amount owed. Total balance owed. Bottom left-hand corner goes the minimum monthly amount that you have to pay every month. And in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to divide your total amount due into the monthly payments. Is
so in the example in the workbook, it's Visa, minimum $100 a month, $2,000 total payments, and that means the number 20 means it'll take you 20 months to wipe out this debt.
Yeah, you basically take the total amount due, which is $2,000 divided by 100, and that equals 20 months. So for every single debt that you have, you're going to draw this visual. And again, refer to the workbook because it's in there. It'll make it very, very clear. But for every single debt, you're going to set up this quadrant, and you're going to have this circled number that says how many months it will take to pay these off.
So if you go to the diagram, with me, I had several Visa cards, several MasterCards. One at American Express, American Express really gets nasty, which was good, but they really came after me hard. And then there was other things like school loans, car loans are number 2, personal loans. So all of these debts we had to line up. Plus, I had creditors I owed money to.
So as Robert said, it's every single debt. And a lot of times, as I said with Robert, he wanted to tell me about this one guy in Hawaii that maybe he has to pay. So the people that you owe money to, even if you don't have a monthly plan set up with them, make one up, but put them on your list. In this list also includes your personal residence. If you own a house that you're living in, put that figure in there too.
Okay, so let's go to step number 6, because one of the reasons Kim and I got so much richer faster was we paid off our house, everything, because that's bad debt. A lot of people call your house an asset, but it was really a liability. Is it a good investment? Yes, but I don't want to make monthly payments to live there for the rest of my life because that's bad debt to me. So with this process, you can get completely out of debt, including your house and cars, if you follow it step by step. So step number 6 is to determine the order for paying off each debt.
And this is where that little circled number is going to come into play. You're going to start with the smallest circled number you have. And if you look in the workbook, that's not the Visa payment that we just talked about. Visa payment came in at number 6, but the smallest circled number was number 8, which was a department store credit card loan. It was $800 owed, and you had to pay $100 a month, so the circled number was 8. That's the smallest number in the example that we use, so that's number 1. That means you're going to pay that debt off first. And people often say, I want to make one comment, this does not take into account the interest rate on the debt. And shouldn't I pay off my biggest interest rate first? Don't we want to get the one with the highest interest rate off the books first? Not necessarily in this formula. In this formula, you want to see a result quickly. You want to know that this formula works. So we're going to take the shortest debt that you have, the one that you can pay off the quickest. And when you see that result, when you see that paid off, you can see the formula working, you have a win, it'll encourage you to move forward. So that's why we start with the smallest number.
So in this example, in the workbook, is the department store credit card, total debt owes $800, minimum payment $100 a month, so it would take 8 months. So it's nothing, as Kim says, it's not about the interest payment, it's the fastest one you can wipe out immediately.
Right, and we want to keep it simple. So go through every diagram you have of every debt and look at that circle number and put them in order from smallest to largest, and that's the order you're going to be paying off these debts.
So if you look at the workbook, number 1 was a department store, number 2 was a jewelry installment loan, number 3 was a home store credit card, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have all the numbers lined up, then step number 7 is...
This is the key, and this is really the only thing you really have to put some effort into. And all you have to do is come up with an extra $100 or $200 per month.
And what do you do with that $100 or $200 a month?
Well, first of all, people are going to say, oh, how do you come up with an extra $100? I'm strapped. I'm up to here. I can't make any more money. What do I do? What do I do? And so Robert and I were talking about, well, what did we do?
We went and started little seminars.
We had little seminars, 10 people.
Yeah, so once a month, we'd put on this little seminar and people would pay like $300 and all that. And after all our costs, actually we started making quite a bit more money just doing those little seminars.
It kept growing. It kept growing.
Like I said, when you have those creditors screaming at you, that's better motivation than those piggy banks who want you to invest in them. So when they were screaming at us, every month we would do those little seminars, do a little advertising, and people would show up. And after we paid all our costs, we had a few extra dollars. We paid our taxes. And then that was the extra money with which we went after all the debt.
That's it. And that's all really you have to come up with. I mean, Robert's nephew, he goes on eBay and he starts selling things. You could sell things on eBay, make $100 a month. You could open up a lemonade stand on the weekends and make $100 a month. I mean, it's not rocket science, and you're going to be amazed at how easy it is.
Or get a job at a taco factory and, part-time at night or on the weekends. But just make that extra $100, and whatever you make is then focused onto that debt pile.
Which goes up to step number 8, and this is where we're going to start paying off that first debt, which is the $800 credit card from the department store. Now, let me start here. What you're going to do, except for debt number 1, you are only going to pay the minimum amount due. No more.
On all the other debts.
On everything else.
And you're just putting this laser hawk-like focus on debt number 1, which is the $800.
Yep. And let me guess that some of you, as I was told, no, you have to pay off a little bit more on every credit card, and that's how you're going to get out of debt. And I did that, and Robert and I did that, and we just never got ahead. It didn't seem to make a dent in what we were doing. So I knew that formula wasn't going to work. So again, minimum monthly amount due on every other debt except debt number 1.
And then because we stepped it up to, let's say, $200, instead of taking 8 months, it took 4 months to wipe it out entirely.
Right, because debt number 1, your minimum amount is $100. You're now going to take that extra $100 that you've made, and you're going to apply it to debt number 1. So instead of $100, you're going to pay $200. So instead of paying it off in 8 months, it's going to take you 4 months.
Boom! And it's gone. And all of a sudden you go, holy moly, now.
Celebrate.
You celebrate, but now you have an extra $200 because you got the $100 that you were paying off on that credit card debt or that department store debt, and you have the extra $100 you make in a month, so you have $200, and now you can go attack the next one.
And this is, again, why we start with the shortest time period possible, because, wow, look, it works. All right, I got rid of a debt. And so that's one of the most important things, is to keep your confidence up as you go through the process.
Yeah, buy yourself a Diet Coke and celebrate.
There you go.
Do something.
But do celebrate. Okay, so also when you pay off that first debt, now that you have this visual diagram in front of you, take a big red marker and put an X through it. And that one is off your charts. It's done. Celebrate. Step number 9, time to move on to debt number 2. Now, here's what you do. Debt number 1, you've been paying $200 a month. So you go to debt number 2. If you look in the workbook, debt number 2 is a jewelry installment plan. You owe $400. Your minimum payment is $45. So instead of paying just $45 every month, you're going to pay $45 plus the $200 you were paying on debt number one. So you're going to pay $245 a month on debt number two. And guess how long that's going to take you to pay that off? Less than 2 months.
Poof.
Done.
Gone.
Gone. Celebrate.
Yep.
So you cross that one off. Now you move on to debt number three. Look in the workbook, and that is a home store credit card. And debt number three is $120 minimum payment. Add the $245 you were paying on debt number two. You're now paying $365, and your total debt is $1,200. So it's going to take you, instead of, as it looks, 10 months, it's going to take you much shorter than that to pay that off. And you'd keep going through this process, adding every time to your new debt the amount you were paying from the last debt.
Obviously, this is not going to work if you pay off one debt and you go back into debt, or that you pay off one or two and then you go back to making the minimum payments. What you're doing is you're laser focusing on wiping out each one of these debts or loans that you own until they're all wiped out. And if you follow this process, it should take you 7 to 8 years to completely wipe out even your home mortgage.
Yeah, most people tell me it's 5 to 8 years to get completely out of debt. And if you look at the example in the workbook, this person was over $200,000 in debt, including their home. Their home was $150,000, so they had $50,000 in debt on top of that. In going through this formula, in just over 3.5 years, they had the $50,000 entirely paid off, and it took them less than 4.5 years to pay off their house completely. So in about 8 years, they were completely debt-free of $200,000. So again, in about 8 years, they were entirely debt-free. The house payment alone was going to take them over 20 years. So here they are, 8 years debt-free. And all they had to do was come up with an extra $100 a month to do that. That's it.
And a lot of discipline to keep rolling through.
And a lot of discipline.
This is what Betty, the bookkeeper, fought us on, but it worked anyway. And then the next step 10 is how we became financially free instead of going back into debt or just spending that cash on doodads and things like this. For those of you who are rich dad, poor dad, or played the cash flow game, you know what we do is we invest that money even faster. So in this case, all that money, instead of spending it, we just kept buying more properties, stocks, bonds. We never buy mutual funds. But we had money to invest at even greater rate of speed. And that's how our investment rate went from 30% up to 80% today, and is now in the millions of dollars we're continuing to reinvest. And we live off of our cash flow from our properties. So it's really interesting how this process starts to snowball. It's a compounding effect of getting richer and richer faster. So this process of getting out of debt was how we started in 1984, and I was really in bad shape. And Kim applied some discipline and some truth-telling to the process, and holding my feet to the fire, and we had Betty to keep my conscience in and remind me. And in 10 years, we not only were out of debt, we were financially free. We're making about $10,000 a month, about $120,000 a year, and our expenses were about $36,000 a year. So every month we made about $10,000 from our rental properties and about $3,000 in expenses, and we just still to this day, 10 years later or 20 years later, we just keep doing the same thing, and now it's in the millions of dollars. Same habit, same process, staying out of debt, getting richer and richer. Well, we have a lot of good debt, lots and lots of apartment houses and commercial buildings, but that's good debt, and that's how we get richer and richer and reinvesting it.
So as I said earlier, that this formula was going to show you how to get out of bad debt and how to accumulate money to start investing. So very quickly, just going back to the example, paying their very final debt, they were paying monthly over $2,800 a month to pay off their house. That house gets paid off. They still have that $2,800 a month. And as Robert said, instead of going out and blowing it and buying doodads and all sorts of things,
and you powerboat,
you have $2,800 a month to invest. And that's where that money comes from. And again, it goes back to $100 a month is all you have to do. And now you've got $2,800 a month to invest without really doing anything different. So again, this is the formula we've used. This is how we've gotten out of bad debt. This is what really got us moving forward to start investing, to accumulate the money to do that, and to get us financially free.
And we don't believe in living below our means. I mean, today, you're going to say, well, when do we start enjoying our money? Today, Kim and I own about 7 cars, lots of houses. We travel by private jet and all that, but we have the cash flow from our investments doing that and not our credit cards paying for that stuff. And it's not debt, it's income coming into us constantly. So our assets from our investments buy our liabilities today. And the reason so many people get in trouble in the first place is they buy liabilities first, and then they try and buy assets second, and it never happens. They just keep buying more liabilities like cars, boats, and things like this. By getting out of debt, bad debt, and then buying assets, now our assets buy our liabilities. So we still have a great lifestyle, incredible lifestyle. The best thing is we don't have to worry about money. We don't have to worry about anything, because we always have more and more money coming in because the process keeps going.
So that is the 10-step process for getting out of debt. And in closing, we just want to add a few more tips that really have helped us stay on track, keep focused financially, and keep increasing our wealth, which happens day and day and day in and out.
So go again to the workbook and these few bonus tips. Number one is it takes discipline and dedication. And remember, it is a process. It is a process, from going from where you are to where you want to be. And if you don't have dedication and discipline, the process falls apart, not because it's a bad process, but because you lack discipline and dedication.
The second point people ask me often is, do you have to be debt-free before you invest? Our answer is no. That's a choice you can make. But for me and Robert, we were investing even though we had quite a bit of bad debt. What we did is we stuck to this formula, but we kept finding the money to invest. So no, you do not have to be debt-free to begin investing.
For example, while we were going through this process, by this time we had moved from California to Portland, Oregon, and we found this smoking 18-unit apartment house. And back then, I can't believe how cheap it was, but back then it was only $385,000. And we didn't have any money. We were still paying off our debt. So the cash, by understanding and assessing the evaluating the property, we realized we could get 100% financing and still make money from the deal. So that's when, I went knocking on bank doors with Kim, and we finally found one banker. His name is David Riffle, one of the greatest guys we ever met from U.S. Bank. And he gave us 100% financing to buy this apartment house, 18 units worth $385,000. And it put like $1,000 a month extra in our pocket. So the answer is we never stopped investing because that was part of the game anyway. So we got richer and richer, still paid off our debt, and we still had our piggy banks filling up with the money we're putting in, with the 10%, 10%, 10%. So we never stopped. We didn't limit ourselves. We didn't have limiting thoughts like, oh, I can't afford it, or this is too hard, or the bank won't give me the money.
It takes money to make money.
Yeah.
When I have money, I'll invest, all of that.
Right. So step number 3 is that if you're married or in a long-term relationship, go through this process together with your spouse or significant other, because it was this process that makes us a happy couple today. People look at Kim and say, well, is she a trophy wife? As heaven knows, I'm definitely not a trophy husband.
Yes, anyway, you are. Yes, you are.
I know she didn't marry me for money, and we actually grew together. We got smarter together. We understand each other better. And the process of going from deeply in debt to, excessively rich has been a great process, and it makes us love each other more. I really don't, everybody makes their own choices, but I know a lot of guys are on the second and third and fourth wives, and they always marry another one with no brains, but looks good, And if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but that's not what I wanted to do.
Well, there's also a lot of women out there who just want to turn over all the financial responsibilities to their husband or their partner. And I don't recommend that either, because as Robert said, the most important thing of this whole process is we learned together. We learned a lot together. And when we had to come up with extra money, how are we going to get it? It was really a growing process. And I see so many couples grow apart. Here's an opportunity where you guys, as a couple, can grow together. By
solving a very big problem called getting out of debt and getting rich.
And getting rich. That's the most fun.
So number 4 and number 5 steps 4 and 5 the tips are pretty similar. You got to keep your spirits up. The hardest thing after I had to face all the debt was I wanted to go eat and drink and spend more money.
Didn't want to face it. I didn't want to face it.
And Betty, the bookkeeper, was really good about this because she really did. She looked like my first grade teacher, and she really scolded me several times. So she was really good. And she kept us going, which is tip number 5. Even though it looks bleak, keep going, because somehow we always got through it. There were times we didn't have money for 3 or 4 days, but something always happened, and we just continue on. So many people say, well, I got to cling to this job, or I can't do this. Well, something always happens. Like a lot of people believe in God, but we learn to trust in God. And we kept doing, if we were going for the right purposes and being ethical and moral and legal, things kept working for us. And so remember that two minds are better than one. In our case, it was Kim, myself, and Betty, the bookkeeper. Boy, she was really great for us.
She kept us going, yes.
And then we had Dave Riffle, our banker, and all this. And along the way, we found great people. And, it was Bobby who allowed us to sleep in her basement and things like this. And we love Bobby forever because of that, because she took care of us when we were really down. But in the process, it really made us stronger and built better relationships for us.
I would say so. I would say it was probably one of the toughest times, actually the toughest time I've ever been through, and I would say that Robert's ever been through. And looking back in retrospect, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to us, because it did make us stronger. It made us face our problems, made us get through our problems, handled the pressure, knew we could make it, and we came through the other side.
And number 6 is, play the cash flow 101 game. Whenever we have financial problems, a lot of times the brain gets stuck, there's no oil in the brain or something, and it goes into a jammed. So get out the cash flow game, play the game, and then what the game does is it kind of loosens up your brains and gets the juices going, gives you new ideas, and you can talk to the friends playing the game. If you don't have a game, go to richdad.com, and we have cash flow clubs all over the world, and you can join them and talk to them. And a lot of them are like support groups to help you get through your financial challenges. Donald Trump and I wrote a book together. It was Why We Want You to Be Rich. But if you know, Donald Trump was $1 billion in debt, and I was only $1 million. And it actually made us better people, facing the problem and getting out. So all of us have money problems. It's just how you handle them. So find the cash flow game, get together with some friends, play the game, and, I think your brain will come up with solutions that are unique for yourself. So as I said at the start of this CD, that some of you today are facing a foreclosure, which is the bank taking your home, or a personal bankruptcy, or you've already gone through a foreclosure and a bankruptcy. And those are kind of extreme situations. And thank God I didn't have to go through it because I paid off my debts. So here is Scott McPherson and I doing a short interview, and he is an investment banker as well as a mortgage banker, and he can give you a banker's point of view on the subjects of foreclosure and bankruptcy. So welcome, Scott.
Good morning, Robert.
Well, what would you say to somebody who right now they've missed a number of payments on their house, or they lost their job, let's say, or they have hospital bills they cannot pay off? What, as a banker, before they go into a foreclosure or into bankruptcy, what would you recommend?
Well, there's a variety of different things. There's the pre and post reaction to a foreclosure or bankruptcy that we're going to discuss a little bit. If it's imminent and you think you're going to lose your property and you're going to file bankruptcy, or you're going to go into foreclosure or are in foreclosure currently, what I would recommend is to maybe do a little bit of the obvious, and do the right thing. Try to go get yourself help with credit counselors and so forth, and do things that you can try to help yourself prepare for the inevitable maybe of losing your house. Number 2, I think you try the best you can is to market your property, do what you can do to try to sell it if you can, but sometimes you just can't do that in a falling market. And number 3, I would say have open communication with your existing lender and try to work something out with them, because there's a variety of different things, especially in the marketplace that we're in today, that lenders want to try to do this. They don't want a foreclosure either, but I would strongly suggest you have open communication and be honest with them of your situation. The final thing I would say, Robert, is that you also need to describe to them there are certain conditions that occur in post-bankruptcy or post-foreclosure, they're very important, of extraordinary kind of circumstances, like, for example, a medical problem that has forced you into this condition, or losing a job, something like that. And again, down the road, that's going to really help you if you've documented that you've gone in and tried to solve the problem.
So what you're saying is these are challenges outside your normal control or something?
Completely. And post-bankruptcy or foreclosure, when you're back trying to qualify for loans, those types of things that you've already done will help you dramatically in your credit score and dramatically in the interest rates you get after your bankruptcy or foreclosure.
So how would you document that?
Well, I think what you would do is you would have correspondence with your existing lender and explain what the situation is to them very openly, and explain and show that you tried to work with them and to try to solve the issue. Whether it's a two-way street or not, it doesn't really matter, but you've tried. It's been an open door. Also, I think by going to credit counselors and so forth, I think that is, you keep those records and their recommendations and act on them. Try to do what you can do, even though it's a limited basis if you're going through a very tough financial time.
So what you're doing is you're showing good intent and openness.
Completely.
Now, what happens as a banker? Let's say I came to you, and like I said, I'll restate it again. I don't have a bankruptcy or a foreclosure against me, although I've been nearly $1 million down. What do you as a banker do, or what's your response when you look onto somebody's credit application or financial statement that they have a bankruptcy or foreclosure? What is your first response?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. A single-family home versus a commercial real estate transaction. First of all, disclose. Best thing you can do is come in and tell me about it, because I'm going to find it. So you might as well be open with me. So once we've done that, it is not impossible by any means to get a new loan on a single-family home if you've filed a bankruptcy or had a foreclosure. Effectively, it precludes you from certain type of loans. You will not be a prime credit kind of borrower now. You'll be like what's in the papers now, subprime paper, Alt-A borrower, which means simply you're a perceived higher risk, which means simply you're going to be charged a higher interest rate. So it's not impossible, so the world's not coming to an end, but it's going to be more difficult to do
So
that.
with a foreclosure or bankruptcy, I could buy a new house, or I could invest in commercial real estate.
You could. Now, the one thing that we talked about briefly before was if the foreclosure or the bankruptcy was caused by an external situation occurring, loss of job, medical emergency, loss of a spouse. If you've documented and all that, and you have a good record and bookkeeping of that, and you bring it in, that is going to help you on your credit score and your ultimate interest rate. Again, you've showed the intent of trying to solve the issue, not run from the issue, and that's really what people are looking for. On the commercial side, Robert, it's a little different. We're not so zeroed in on FICO scores and so forth, but what we really are zeroed in for on a commercial side is one, disclosure. Again, we want to know about it up front. We also want to know the circumstances, and I would strongly suggest if you're in the commercial real estate business and you're borrowing on commercial loans and have a foreclosure or a bankruptcy in your past or are going to have one, prepare a letter. Be prepared, because every time you go and borrow money again, you're going to have to explain that and explain it through. It will not stop you from getting a loan, but you're going to have to explain. And the critical things there are intent and how you acted during these events, i.e., in a bankruptcy, if you were a bad guy and took the money and were fraudulent, you're going to have a very difficult time getting a loan. If you were just in a product of owning 10 rental homes in downtown Detroit right now, for example, and the market went away from you completely, you lost your tenants, blah, 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 you did everything you could, that's a different situation. And that's what people are looking for, is the type of person we're dealing with, not necessarily the FICO score like you would on a residential.
Okay, that's good information. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or any words of encouragement to the listening audience, especially if they're facing foreclosure or bankruptcy?
Well, the only encouragement one is life will go on, and it's probably best to get this behind you. And there are many, many people in today's world across the United States that are going through exactly probably what you're going through. So you're not alone. It may seem like it, but you're not. Get it behind you. Move on with life. You will still be able to borrow money. Also, the other thing I would strongly suggest, if you're going to go through a foreclosure or a bankruptcy, is go meet with a mortgage banker right now. Talk to them what it's going to take to rebuild your credit score, because there are certain things that need to be done immediately, and you need to start on that the day after you file the foreclosure or the bankruptcy.
So again, it's relationships, it's teams, it's having good advice and not going into a shell and hiding and taking bad advice.
That's exactly right.
So I want to say thank you to Scott and thank you to Kim.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, and thank you for listening, and we trust this has been very, very helpful, and that we wish you a world of no bad debt and tons of good debt.
And remember, by facing this challenge, you get smarter, and that's the most important thing. The Rich Dad Company is about giving you the financial education so you can handle bigger problems and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you.